My game of the day from round 5 of the Candidates tournament is Levon Aronian against Alexander Grischuk. Both players have had a pretty rocky start to the tournament, but they've both ended up on 50%, 2 out of 4. They're both really enterprising players, very creative indeed. So, what would happen in their game today? Well, I can tell you, they certainly guaranteed a lot of entertainment. So, Grischuk not playing a solid Queen's Gambit or Ragozin or Queen's Indian, nothing like that. He's fianchettoed his bishop with g6, and with f3, Aronian is trying to avoid a Grunfeld. So black can of course still play d5. But these positions have not been very easy for black over the past few years, and Aronian has a very good record with this system with white. So Grischuk played c5, so now we're going into a kind of Benoni where white has played f3, and Aronian has a lot of experience with this system as white. So as the pawn is on f3, then of course we can't play knight f3, so the knight has to go somewhere else. This is the whole problem with this system for white actually. It's sorting out a decent square for this knight, because the pawn structure is very fine indeed. But this knight just has to end up on a decent square. So it goes to g3 just to sort of get out of the way, but it's not always the best square, particularly as it encourages black to throw this pawn down the board. And this kind of position is, well, it's pretty well known, typical. And knight h7, so looks slightly odd, but again, completely normal idea. So one thing is it opens up the diagonal for the bishop, and the other thing is it prepares to attack white's centre with f5, because if this centre remains as it is, then, well, it's hard for black to get some play. And now Aronian has played normal move bishop e3 previously. Looks very standard, prevents black playing bishop d4 in some circumstances. So he played bishop f4. This is a new move, believe it or not. I mean, it still looks more natural to me on e3, to be honest, but anyway. I mean, what the subtleties are, it's not exactly clear to me, I have to say, but it's important that white tries to claim control over this diagonal. But bishop f4 is a very, very provocative move, because it encourages black to throw his pawns down the board, and, well, Grischuk needs very little encouragement to go on the attack. So, I mean, there are pros and cons to having the pawn on g5. One thing is it potentially weakens this square f5, but of course, you know, it could be useful to throw this pawn into the attack. So knight e5, and now g3. So we can see that Aronian basically wants to get in f4 really quickly, and because the pawn is on g5, then it could mean that white is able to open lines much quicker. So now we're seeing another point to tempting this pawn forward with g5. But black could actually use this g-pawn. Aronian had considered bishop h3. It's an interesting move. And with the idea of after white takes, then black pushes on with g4. Very interesting. And this bishop could actually be very useful here. Could even block the g file sometimes. I mean, after bishop h3, castle's queenside is a better move, and then f4 and e5 could be really powerful. But yeah, an interesting idea. Grischuk played bishop d7. Aronian took on g4. Again, g4 and knight f3 is possible here, but Grischuk recaptured, and Well, Aronian said afterwards he felt at this moment things started to go his way. It does look like a very pleasant move to play, hitting this bishop, because of course black is hardly going to castle kingside into this attack. So because of that, you know, it's already quite uncomfortable for black's king. So first things first, how does black deal with this threat? Well, Grischuk played f5. I mean, if for example, bishop f6, f4 already looks very dangerous with the idea of breaking with e5, as we're about to see in the game. So f5, it is at least thematic, very logical in this situation to try and break down white's centre, and the queen protects the bishop. So Aronian fights fire with fire, pushes on with the pawn, and now, well, wherever the black knight goes, e5 is going to happen. This is the point of playing like this. Otherwise, white's centre is just collapsing. So, and you know, exchanging off like this, these pawns look very pleasant now. You can see it. They block out these pieces. That was never Aronian's intention, of course. He wanted to play this standard pawn break. So takes, and now d6, and given up a pawn, but that d pawn just thrusts through into black's position and causes all kinds of problems. And now the d5 square is available for white's pieces sometimes, but also this diagonal. So whoops, I misfired with the bishop. This diagonal, when the bishop reaches c4, as we're about to see, this can be extremely painful for black. So first things first, where does the queen go? Well, let me just show you one very nice variation. I should say queen e6 was played in the game, but let me show you queen f7 and what can possibly happen. Knight d5, so it's like a hole has been knocked through. White has blasted through a hole in the castle walls, and now the pieces flood through. So obviously a terrible threat here. So castles, let's see what happens. White is winning this position basically. So first of all, open up the G file. The knight takes here. We give a check, and the king goes to h8. We give another check, and now white captures here, and the threat is to bring the bishop to this square. So for example, after this, bishop c4. I know this is a very long variation, not strictly relevant, but it's very nice. So there's a pin, so black has to play bishop e6, and now knight takes f5. All the tactics work in white's favour. If bishop takes bishop, then this knight gives a devastating check, and if queen takes, then we can win the queen with knight e7 and a knight fork. So now you see what I mean by the d pawn makes room for white's pieces basically. Grischuk played queen e6. Knight e5 is still a good move, but Aronian went for knight b5, which is very strong. And if castles, then, well, simply knight c7 and taking the rook in the corner is very good. And once again, just opening up the G file is excellent for white. And if bishop takes b5 check, then bishop takes b5 check. And if king f7, rook c1, threatening bishop c4. Tremendous for white. So after knight b5, rook c8. The knight comes in, gives a check, and that's exchanged off. So white has won an exchange, but black's pieces are very active. I mean, basically, this position is all about tactics again. You just have to calculate incredibly well. And normally, well, both Aronian and Grischuk are very good calculators. Here, Aronian missed a fantastic move. It's a very computery move. He played rook d1. In fact, castle's queenside is a winning move. But this is very, very difficult to calculate. Well, let me give you a few examples. I guess the critical variation is pawn takes bishop. And now, well, Aronian said that he'd spent his time looking at queen takes d7 and bishop b5, and this isn't working because of this check. If king takes, then queen takes bishop, and, well, black wins like that. And after king c2, then queen b5. Well, basically, in this position, black is fine, even though white gets the queen back. But, well, black is more than fine. Black is actually winning this position. So if we go back here, so black has just played pawn takes bishop. So Aronian thought queen takes bishop wasn't working and gave up on this entire variation. In fact, white can play knight takes pawn. A very calm move in the middle of seeming chaos, but it wins. First of all, there's a pin here, so exchanging with the queen, well, white can just trade off. I guess a critical variation is bishop h6. Looks really nasty, but bishop b5 is a winning move. I mean, you know, so difficult to see these moves in a game. And if bishop b5, this one is a killer. And we're going to get another queen here. And after bishop b5, if castles, then, well, we take this, and this is too much. Actually, it reminds me a little bit of Kramnik, the game between Kramnik and Caruana in the last round. And here, this wins. I mean, you have to see so far ahead and see obscure tactics and realize, for example, here that, you know, you're going to make a queen. There are lots of wonderful variations, but trust me, this is winning. That's what the computer says, and I've gone through lots and lots of lines, and it's very convincing. But almost impossible to see at the board. Levon played rook d1, which he thought was also winning. In fact, both players thought this was tremendous for white. Knight g5. So take care, this knight is spinning into the position, and if bishop takes pawn here, then knight f3 is out of the blue checkmate. So queen, and now the queen came down. Queen c7 check. And here, Grischuk has to play queen e7. I mean, some of the moves that were played here are really mysterious, I have to say. And actually, black is surviving this position. If queen takes f4, I mean, this is a complete mess, of course. And incredibly, black is defending this position. I mean, again, it's tough to spot. Coming back here after queen e7, white should trade queens. And, well, black is the exchange down, but has such active pieces. But probably it should end in a draw. But it's a very tricky position. But after queen c7, remarkably, Grischuk played king g8. And here, Aronian saw that he could take on g4 and win with rook d6. And if queen f7 taking on c8, or if queen f7, queen f5, then bishop d3. Just winning. He saw that, but instead he didn't know why. He played rook d6. It's also a winning move, by the way. And after queen f7, somehow he just got really confused. And he played queen d8 check. He said he lost his cool afterwards because somehow he hadn't expected queen f7. But if he'd played queen takes bishop here, this is just completely winning. Queen to c5 is the most convincing move. I mean, the moment white is a rook up here, so it's not a big surprise this is winning. And, well, for example, if pawn takes, then rook takes, you exploit this pin here. And, well, there's bishop d3 check coming after pawn takes rook as well. And knight e4, okay, looks for a moment as though it might be dangerous, but then this move is completely winning. You give up the queen, but you get so much material here. And now bishop c5. So you're going to end up winning this. Rook and 3 minor pieces against the king. It's completely dead. So this is really bizarre that Levon missed this move and instead played queen d8. Extraordinary. And here, well, you know, he can take on g5. Perhaps he should take on g5 because this will actually lead to a draw very quickly. It's a draw by perpetual check and queen h5 and so on. But instead, he took on f4 and black is surviving this position. It's quite extraordinary. So they reach this endgame where black has a knight and 2 pawns for a rook. And black's minor pieces are suddenly so active. And white has to take great care here. Well, you can see from nowhere, Grischuk has managed to coordinate his forces. Minor pieces need good support, good outposts, and all these 3 pieces have good support here. Now Levon has to be very, very careful here. But he was. I mean, at various moments, black could try and grab this pawn or this pawn, but for example, after this, the problem is it might be another pawn, but actually black to some extent loses coordination. And in this kind of position, white should be fine. Even though it's now 3 pawns, but white should be fine. The game ended like this. And here, Aronian offered a draw, and Grischuk thought, right, enough. You know, I've survived this position, and he accepted. He said that he was probably going to take this h-pawn, and this leads to a liquidation after this, and, well, it should be a draw, basically, after this. Pawns are getting exchanged off. An extraordinary game. Incredible blunders. I think Castle's queenside, well, I think the chances of spotting that in the game are very, very slim at this moment. That's a really tough one. That's a real computer move. But later on, queen takes bishop on c8. That's a shocker. And sometimes this happens to Levon. You know, he's so creative. But sometimes when he's finishing off a game, he fails to nail it. All 4 games were drawn today, so that means that Fabiano Caruana, after 5 rounds, is still in the lead with 3.5.